Now this clause is very important. Pre-examination process. Pre-examination process. So where does it start from? Sample collection. Lab shall have documented procedure and information for pre-examination activities. Pre-examination activities, where will you write? What is known as the QSP for pre-examination activities?
In sample collection manual.
Sample collection manual. So whatever we will go through in 5.4, everything will come in pre-sample collection manual. Pre-examination activity or sample collection manual, information will be same. In manual there would be specific information also as per NABL 112 for specific tests. How prothrombin time sample has to be taken, how ESR sample has to be taken, in how much time it should reach the lab, how you have to transport, how you have to store, the details which are given where? In 112. So all those things will come in sample collection manual, right? So the first clause is 5.4.2, information for patients and users. So where do you have information for patients and users? Where do you have this information? Have you heard the word directory of services? Huh? Directory of services. Or some people may call it by different names. Normally every lab has directory of services, or we call it DOS, which is like a booklet which has all the tests which are done in the lab or even outsourced. Whatever facility you are giving in the lab, whether you are doing or you are outsourcing, that is there in the directory of services. What information should be there? Location of lab, naturally the address would be there. Type of clinical services offered by the lab, including the examinations referred to other labs. So in your directory you have to mention about the outsourced test also, but you can mention this test is outsourced, not done in the lab. Opening hours of the lab, examinations offered by the lab including as appropriate, information concerning sample required, primary sample volume, precautions, turnaround time. So how does it look like? Normally in DOS, what are the columns? What are the columns in DOS? What information do you give to your patient? Doctor sir? What is the information which you normally give in your directory of services? Your directory of services which you give to a patient or to your franchisee or to your collection center. So what should be there as an information?
For the patient.
For the patient.
It depends upon what type of means if patient is coming for blood sugar and all. So if it is written over that it is coming for the prescription of.
See, for directory of services it would not be specific for specific patient. It is general for everyone. It's the booklet from the lab which goes everywhere to your clients. So it will have test code, whatever identity you have given, name of the test, then
timing will be done,
method, then transportation method, any specific precautions you need to transport or any timings within which it should be transported. Then
stability,
that will come here only. What is the stability?
timing.
Then timings of performing. Some tests are performed twice a week, some are performed every day, some are performed whenever. That information will be there. What else?
Reporting date.
Reporting date. Date of reporting will come here only. You can say timings or date of reporting or turnaround time. So all those timings will come. Then biological range also. In many of the DOS it is given. Then price. Then any special precautions. Any special precautions required. Along with instructions for completion of request form, instructions for preparation of patient, instructions for patient collected samples. What do you mean by patient collected samples? Patient collected samples. Which patient collects himself? How 24-hour urine has to be collected, how culture sample has to be collected, how stool sample has to be collected. Those instructions should also be there. Instructions for transportation. Any requirement for patient consent. Labs criteria for acceptance and rejection. Because these directories are at the sample collection areas. It may be your franchisee, so he has to have all this information, where to take consent. If he knows acceptance and rejection criteria, then maybe unnecessary sample which is not worth sending, he might not be sending. Then list of factors to significantly affect the performance of the examination or interpretation of the result. For example, any colored sample. Sometimes if urine is too dark colored, then what do? You ask the patient, have you taken any B complex? Okay. And if that information is given to the lab, is it useful or not? It is useful for the lab. And if your collection person knows this information is required, then only he will be able to take it. Availability of clinical advice. Because advisory service has to be there for the patient. If supposing collection center person doesn't know, then he should make the person talk to the pathologist on telephone if required. Policy on protection of personal information, lab's complaint procedure. How anybody would complain, that should also be mentioned in your DOS. So look at very clearly, each and everything has to be written in the DOS so that any person who is collecting samples for you, for the lab, should feel self-sufficient that I have complete information about taking a test. Lab shall have information available for patients and users that include an explanation of clinical procedure to be performed to enable informed consent. Importance of provision of patient and family information where relevant. For example, in genetic testing. Now you are unnecessarily asking too many questions to the patient. Patient might say, why are you asking me so many questions? So your collection person should know what to ask for what test, where history is important and what kind of history he is supposed to ask. So relevant history. So this was all about what? Directory of services. Now the next is
what you have written after tag, what comes with the tag?
Biological range. Tag, biological range, price, any special precaution required. Next comes request form. Normally what do we call it? TRF, test requisition form. Request form or an electronic equivalent. So it can be hard copy, it can be soft copy. There can be a format which you have sent to your physicians, which they are filling and sending to you, where there are columns, there may be a list of few common tests where they can just tick mark or they can write a particular test. So that can be a printed test requisition form, or Patient is coming with a prescription. Your reception is noting down the whole information and creating a TRF in the software. Or reception has a hard copy of TRF, giving it to the patient to fill the complete information, whatever he knows, and rest information he or she can fill from the prescription. But TRF has to be there, soft copy or hard copy. What will it include? Patient identification, gender, date of birth, unique ID of the patient. When we say unique ID, it should have a alpha or numerical or both. You know, if it is IPD patient, then maybe some identity is carried on from IPD. If it is OPD, then it is generated when the patient is giving the sample. But it has to be, and it has to continue as the same ID throughout the process, not that in the lab it changes. Continuity of that ID is important. Then name or other unique identification of clinician, whosoever is sending the patient, his details. Why the telephone number of the referring physician is important? Information about, if there is any information required, any case discussion required, you should be able to access and you should be able to talk. Type of primary sample, anatomic site of origin, whether it's a fluid, it's a histopathology sample, what kind of a sample. Sometimes we have received certain histosample where it is written only tissue. Where from, whether it is a tissue from the head or from the toe, they don't write. And when you call them that this is what you have written only tissue, this tissue belongs to which place? So they will say, Doctor Sahab, isliye to bheja, we have sent because of this reason only, that you find out where is it from. Right? So it should not be like that. Examination requested. Clinically relevant information about the patient. History. So how many of you get the history? Do you get the histories? You do.
Chromosome analysis,
So you really have to stress your mind where you get the history, and only few tests come in mind. Whereas history is important for every test, wherever relevant. Wherever, in the sense, even for urine culture. Do you think it is important? It is important to have a history of antibiotics, whether patient has taken or not. If it is a prothrombin test, what is important? History of anticoagulant is important, whether he is taken or not. For every information, if there is history, it is helpful. On TRF, whatever I have told you, other than that, date and where relevant, time of primary sample collection. There are 3 signatures or 3 identifications which should come on TRF. First is the person who has taken the sample. Second is the person who has received the sample. Third is who has processed the sample. That will not come on TRF, but these are the 3 people which should be identifiable. And then comes the authorized signatory, of course. Format of TRF can be soft copy, hard copy. Lab shall be willing to cooperate with users or their representatives in clarifying the user's request. If you are telling patient to fill in the TRF, you should be helping them out so that they fill the complete information required. So next clause is 5.4.4, primary sample collection and handling. Lab shall have a documented procedure for the proper collection and handling of the samples. So if you see, there are multiple procedures here. How you will create a DOS, how you will create a TRF. Now how will you handle the primary sample? Where users require deviation and exclusion or addition to the documented procedure, these shall be recorded. Any example of that? For example, now lipid profile has to be taken empty stomach. Now somebody has to go out of town, or he has taken a cup of tea, or because of A, B, C, D, any reason you have to deviate from your normal process. You will notify. Okay. Maybe you will do it. First thing is you will say, no, you are not empty stomach, we will not do. Now because of whatever reason, physician says, I know he has taken, but this has to be done because of whatever reason. Then you will notify. That patient has already taken this. Now PP has to be after 2 hours, he's coming after 2.5 hours. Physician says, no, you do it. You have to notify. So any deviation from the normal process has to be documented. All procedures carried out on a patient need the informed consent of the patient. Most of the routine samples where patient is coming in telling, okay, take my sample, it's understood that consent is there. That is why he's there in the lab. But in certain processes like, where do we take? FNAC, HIV testing, bone marrow. So any procedure you have to perform, you have to take consent plus HIV. So all invasive procedure where there is risk of complication, you need to explain to the patient, this is what I am going to do, and this can lead on to this complications, and then patient should be aware of what you are going to do. In emergency situations, consent might not be possible. For example, if a patient has come injured, he is unconscious, then maybe without consent also you have to perform certain tests. Adequate privacy during the reception and sampling should be available. Instructions for pre-collection activities. Lab's instructions for pre-collection activities include completion of request form. So these instructions are primarily for whom? For your person who is collecting. That complete the TRF. Then preparation of the patient. Confirm from the patient that he is prepared, he is fasting, whatever required is there. Type and amount of primary sample, how he has to collect, in which vacutainer he has to collect, timings of collection, clinical information relevant to or affecting sample collection, examination performance, as we just talked about, any drug history, any antibiotics he has taken. All those histories should be important. Then instructions for collection activity. So when he is collecting, then what will he do? The first step is identify the person. That he is collecting the right patient sample. So he has to match the TRF, ask the patient, you are so and so, take the sample, put it in the vial, sample, vial has to be labeled, shown to the patient, your sample, okay, patient confirms my name, that means that process is complete. So time and again take the confirmation from the patient. Because worldwide it has been seen that this is one big error which is happening in most of the sophisticated places also. In Western country also this is one big reason of problems where there is wrong identification of the patient. So you have to be very careful about it. Determination of the identity. Verification that patient meets pre-examination requirements like fasting or any medication status, or any medication has to be stopped or it has to be taken before the sampling. Instructions for collection of primary blood and non-blood samples. If there are any additive has to be added to the container, those instructions have to be given. In situation where primary sample is collected as part of clinical practice, information and instruction regarding sample containers should be present at the floors also. For example, if nursing staff is taking samples, so sample collection manual has to be where? On the floors also. Labeling. How they have to label, how they have to number. What all information should be there on the label? Recording of the identity of the person collecting the sample. As I told you, who collects the sample, his name and signature also has to be there on TRF. Instructions for proper storage, pre-examination storage. Alright, so pre-examination storage, because there are certain samples, maybe you are not performing immediately, you are performing after 2 days, 3 days. So how they have to be kept, that should be known. Some samples which have to be moved immediately from the collection area to the lab. How a semen sample has to be handled, how a prothrombin sample has to be handled, that should be known to the people. Safe disposal of the collection material. So basically all these instructions are for whom? Your own sample collection person. There are instructions for the patient which we discussed, TRF we discussed, then instructions for your own employees. Pre-collection, at the time of collection, what are they supposed to do? Then comes transportation. 5.4.5 is transportation. Lab's instructions for post-collection activities shall include packaging of samples for transportation. What are the 3 things which are important? Temperature, then time in which it has to be transported, and the integrity of the sample. That if it has to be kept in a vertical tube, it should not tilt, it should not shake too much, it should be properly packed. Temperature, time and integrity of the sample has to be maintained while transporting the sample. Then comes 5.4.6, sample reception. Now sample has reached the lab. Accession starts. Samples are unequivocally traceable by request and labeling to an identified patient or site. Lab developed and documented criteria for acceptance or rejection of samples are applied. So what are the normal rejection and acceptance criteria?
If it is more than the mark we have labeled,
Is more than mark.
So volume, if volume is less or volume is more,
wrong.
both are not right. Then wrong tube, then
Wrong labeled.
wrong labeled, extensively hemolyzed.
After centrifugation, after when it goes to the lab.
नहीं but कई बार acceptance level पे ही तो you can just look at it, it looks so hemolyzed, you can make out and you feel that it's not acceptable. Sometimes there is EDTA sample which is blackened, you know, totally it is hemolyzed, so you have to reject it there and then. Volume we have talked about.
Leakage.
Other
Sample leakage.
leakage of sample, quantity is not proper. Then if now supposing you have received a CSF sample which is not labeled, what will you do?
It's not labeled 1, 2, 3 and it should be written with one, say, serial number 1, first question, second and third.
It should be written like 1, 2, 3 tubes while taking CSF. Now I am asking, if CSF sample is not labeled, what will you do? Would you accept it or reject it? You will reject it, because your rejection criteria says that if a sample is not labeled, you will reject. Would you reject a CSF sample? Would you reject a histopathology sample? When there is a CSF sample which is not labeled and you know it is a CSF sample, the first thing is perform the test, because you can't waste the sample for looking for whom it belongs to. So the first thing is put it into process, alongside start investigating where has it come from, who brought it. There are not many CSF sample in any of the labs in any one single day. Okay, so it's not very difficult to trace, but you can't keep it there and keep tracing, and by the time you have traced it in 2, 3, 4 hours, the sample is gone. So sample is wasted. So you have to process the sample along with Start investigating where it belongs to. Call the floor, call the logistic person who brought it. Try to look for. Now supposing you have identified, okay, this belongs to that. Take that in written from somebody. Yes, this sample belongs to this. Okay. Whosoever identifies and ensures the sample belongs to this person. Then release the report. Release can be delayed, but process cannot be delayed. Maximum what will happen, if you have not been able to locate, your process will go waste. It's okay, no problem. So for those samples which are precious samples, you can't stop the process. Same is with histopath. So you have to start doing whatever required because they are irreplaceable samples. If a uterus is removed, now you can't take another sample, right? For blood it is fine. For all other materials which are replaceable, it's fine. But for CSF and maybe sometimes for other fluids also, which you can't replace, you need to process, then track, then confirm. Because giving wrong report is also as bad. If you've given somebody else's report to somebody else, that is also wrong. So ensure in written that this belongs to this person, then release the report, right? Then all samples received are recorded in the accession book, worksheet, computer, whatever your system of accession is. Whenever possible, identity of person receiving the sample shall be recorded. The first identity was who has done the phlebotomy. Second identity, who has received the sample. The name of that technician has to be there. Authorized personnel will evaluate for acceptance and rejection criteria, then accordingly samples will be accepted. Where relevant, there shall be instructions for the receipt, labeling, processing, reporting of the sample specifically marked as urgent. So how do you handle urgent samples? Either they should have some kind of identification, some special label, some red mark which says urgent, because it will move out of the track. Transportation will be faster, process will be faster, authorization will be faster, so it has to be clearly identified. Now urgent sample, how do you differentiate an urgent sample and a critical sample? What do you understand? What is the difference?
If the patient go for a surgery, immediately surgery, then we make the urgent, it is urgent for that to, surgery na sample urgent mein chahiye. Because life threatening.
So urgent is on the demand of the customer. Whether your physician wants it urgently or your patient wants it urgently, because of their reasons. Okay, so you have to perform it out of turn. Critical samples are where it is life threatening and most of the times you have observed. Maybe the doctor is not even expecting. He doesn't know that he needs the report urgently, but you have observed, oh, sugar is more than 500. It's critical. I must inform immediately. You have found out falciparum. He was not expecting. That becomes critical. So it is lab generated. Urgent on the demand of the client. All portions of primary sample shall be equivocally traceable to the original primary sample. Means the number, if some portion of the sample has gone to microbiology department and now you need more sample, that sample should be traceable to the primary sample. So number should not change. Primary sample and the portion sample should have same number. Pre-examination handling, preparation, storage. Lab shall have procedures and appropriate facilities for securing patient sample and avoiding deterioration, loss or damage during pre-examination activities and during handling, preparation and storage. Lab procedures shall include time limit for requesting additional examination or further examination on the same primary sample. So normally you store the samples for a particular time and that sample retention time is given again in 112. Biochemistry samples for these many hours, hematology samples for these many hours. Within that period, if somebody asks for a new test, addition test, repeat test, you can do it. So that should also be known to the physicians that within this much time we can ask for a new test. So this was all about the pre-examination process. So in pre-examination process, information in the form of TRF, sample collection, transportation, accession, preparation and storage. So what is the difference between a procedure and process? I told you procedure was the terminology being used earlier, process is the terminology which they are using now. Procedures are driven by completion of the task, process are driven by achievement of the outcome. Procedures are implemented, process are operated. Procedure steps are completed by different people in different departments with different objectives. Process stages are completed by different people with the same objective. Departments doesn't matter. Procedures are discontinuous, process flow to conclusion. Procedures focus on satisfying the rules, process focus on satisfying the customer. Procedures define the sequence of steps to execute a task. Process transforms inputs into outputs. So everywhere if you see, process is more goal oriented, customer oriented, result oriented.
Procedures are discontinuous.
You've done, then matter finishes. It might not lead on anywhere. Process means it has to reach the final conclusion, the end point. Procedures are driven by humans, processes are driven by physical forces, some of which may be activated by humans. When we say, machines are also there. When we say that this organization is process driven, not person driven, what does it mean? Person driven means if supposing so and so is absent, that day his work is stalled. Nobody is able to do that work because he is not there. This thing didn't happen because he was absent. Process driven means there is always a replacement. It doesn't matter who's A, B, C, D. If A is not there, B is there. Process doesn't stop. Whether it is done by equipment, if one equipment is not there, some other substitute should be there. If one person is not there, some other substitute has to be there. So these days all corporates or all good organizations, we say they are process driven. Quality also teaches us what? Process driven, not person specific. Doesn't matter who's that. Process has to go on. Procedures may be used to process information. Information is processed by use of procedure. Procedures exist, they are static. Processes behave, they are dynamic. Procedures cause people to take actions and decisions. Processes cause things to happen. So now coming to 5.5, which is examination process. 5.5.1 selection, verification, validation of examination procedures. Lab shall select examination procedures which have been validated for their intended use. See here, first line says which have already been validated. So you don't have to validate any test. What do you have to do? Verify. So remember the terminology, verification. What you do in the lab with the machine, with the test, with the procedure is verification. They are all already validated. Validation is done by research labs. Validation is done by where the reagents are produced by the vendors. After validations, they come to lab. And we just do 2-3 steps to verify that. Specified requirements for each examination procedure shall relate to the intended use of the examination. What do you mean by intended use of the examination? This terminology, intended use. Intended use is that a test is used for a particular purpose. For example, if it is a creatinine test done for a human serum, that means what we are expecting is that the values should range from the normal values. What is it? Lower value of creatinine? 0.5, 1.8, 1.7. So that means the range should be, let us say, from 0.1 to whatever maximum a creatinine level can go in the human body. If your kit is giving a value ranging from 5 to 10, is it of use? Of no use. It may be a creatinine kit, it's calculating creatinine, but it is not for the intended use. For us, the intended use is which is matching with our requirement, which is matching with the biological ranges of the human body. Validated examination procedures used without modification shall be subject to independent verification by the lab before being introduced into routine use. Lab shall obtain information from the manufacturer, method developer for confirming the performance characteristics of the procedure. Independent verification by the lab shall confirm through obtaining objective evidence in the form of performance characteristics. So for us, the verification is through what? Performance qualification. Performance qualification of machine, performance qualification of the test. So how do we do performance qualification of the test? By running QCs. You run QC for first 20 days and then you check what was the performance. Is it coming within the required range, close to the mean, or it's changing, or it's different, or you need to change the mean, or is it following LJ rules, Westgard rules? When you're plotting on the LJ chart, is it giving the required kind of a curve, what we are looking for? So that means you are checking the performance by quality controls. Lab shall document the procedure used for verification and record the results obtained. Staff with the appropriate authority shall review the verification results and record the review. So as I told you that verification of the examination procedures is what we do and we should be doing. Now where do we need to do validation? Validation, the lab shall validate examination procedures derived from the following sources: non-standard methods, lab designed or developed methods, standard methods used outside their intended scope, validated methods subsequently modified. Means if there is already a validated method, it has come to you, you have verified, it's giving right result, you can perform the test. Now if there is a non-standard method, there is no reference, it doesn't belong to any textbook, somebody told you this also works, so would you start doing it without validation? No. Those are the processes where you need to validate. You have designed some method, it's a lab designed method, you need to validate. Standard method outside intended use. Intended use, as I told you, that it has a range, it has a linearity, it has a methodology. If you have to use for some research purposes for higher levels, or a lab who's doing human samples, has to do something on animal samples, where maybe ranges are different, then you will need to validate. Or validated method but modified subsequently, right? That is where you need validation. Validation shall be extensive as is necessary and confirmed through the provision of objective evidence in the form of performance characteristics that the specified requirements for the intended use of the examination have been fulfilled. Now, if you see what all you need to do during validation, so then you will come to know actually we are not doing validation. Performance characteristics of an examination procedure should include consideration of measurement trueness, measurement accuracy, measurement precision, measurement repeatability, measurement intermediate precision, measurement uncertainty, analytical specificity, including interfering substances, analytical sensitivity, detection limit, measuring interval, diagnostic specificity, diagnostic sensitivity. So it's a long list. So are we doing all these things? Are we checking all these things? No, we are not. So what is advised? Advised is do validated procedure. So don't try to invent your own procedures and then land up into problems, because you will not be able to validate and that procedure will not be acceptable. These kinds of validations in detail are done by the research labs. And if you see in your kit materials, all these values are given. Precision value, accuracy, measurement, repeatability, everything is given in the kit because they have already done and defined. What you are doing is just verifying it. Lab shall document the procedure used for validation and record the results obtained. If you need to validate, then you have to define procedure, record them. Staff with authority shall review the validation. When the changes are made to a validated procedure, again you will have to validate. Any change, any deviation to a normal procedure, you need to validate. Measurement uncertainty. We just talked about it. For you people, you understand CV percentage. What is CV percentage? What is CV percentage? Coefficient of variation. CV percentage. So for all quantitative methods, we calculate CV percentage. So in layman's language, what does it mean? So CV percentage, coefficient of variation, means how much variation are we allowing for any sample. That if it should be 100, okay, if it is still 95 or it is still 105, we still accept it. That is coefficient of variation. What is standard deviation? I am not going into calculation. I am just trying to make you understand in a layman's language.
How close to mean?
So there is a mean. When you plot a LJ chart, there is a mean. Then there is 1 SD. Then there is 2 SD. Then there is 3 SD. Plus and minus. So that means anything which is still 1 standard deviation, it's acceptable. 2 ST, 3 ST, What are the rules which you need to follow? Westgard rules. So there are Westgard rules which you need to follow when you have to interpret 1ST, 2ST, 3ST, where the value goes and how you have to take it, whether you have to accept it or you have to consider it as a outlier. Again, those Westgard rules are also given in 112. To some extent they are given in 112, that when you are running a single control, then how you have to accept. If you are running a double control, then how you have to accept. Now the CV percentage is SD would be different for different reagents. If the values are in points, naturally SD values would also be in points, because it has to be percentage of the particular value. Got it? Standard says that your physician should also know the CV percentage of a particular parameter. When you are sending your scope for accreditation to the NABL, you have to list all the parameters, and in front of all the parameters you have to put the CV percentages also. Means for your lab, what is the CV percentage of a particular parameter? There is a standard guidelines which we follow as CLIA guidelines. CLIA guidelines, that what should be the CV percentage, then you have to calculate your own CV percentage and put that for your lab what is the CV percentage. CLIA guidelines are very, very liberal, broad. When you do it in your daily routine, your CV percentages are much better than the CLIA guidelines. Because with automation, CV percentages have become narrowed. So should the CV percentage be high or low? Which is good? CV percentage should be low. The lower the CV percentage, better is your result. Right? So it is a variation which you are allowing. And we discussed when we talked about, and now also the matter is the same, measurement uncertainty, that this CV percentage is because of what? This variation is because of what?
Temperature or humidity, room temperature.
So those things which are not measurable, which are uncertain, we can't measure, so we include, okay, this much we are allowed, because we can't measure them. As we are able to measure, now if you see, when we were doing ELISA, lot of manual work was being done in ELISA, lot of variation, high CV percentages. We have moved on to CLIA, CV percentages have come down, because there are many factors which now we are able to measure. As the advancement is happening, automation is happening, we are excluding certain uncertain factor. When we were doing manual pipetting, uncertainties was more. From one person to another person, one pipette to another person, uncertainty is more. With automation, that uncertainty factor is gone. So CV percentages further come down. So advancement in technology is helping us to bring the CV percentages down, to bring the uncertainty factors to minimum, so that we can get more accurate results, so that we can get the true values or the values close to the true value of a substance. Right? So that's the idea of the whole concept. So the relevant uncertainty components are those associated with actual measurement process, connecting with the presentation of the sample to the measurement procedure, and ending with the output of the measured value. So starting from start of the measurement till the output, whatever uncertain factors come in between, they are all included in measurement uncertainty. Measurement uncertainties may be calculated using quantity values by the measurement of quality control materials under intermediate precision conditions that include as many routine changes as reasonably possible in the standard operation of the measurement procedures. For example, change of reagent, calibrator batch, different operators, scheduled instrument maintenance. So all these factors will affect the result. Examples of practical utility of measurement uncertainty estimates might include confirmation that patient's value meets quality goals set by the lab and meaningful comparison of a patient value with a previous value of the same type or with the clinical decision value. So whatever is the outcome, you compare it with previous value or you compare it with the clinical decision value. The lab shall consider measurement uncertainty when interpreting measured quantity values. Upon request, the lab shall make its estimates of measurement of uncertainty available to the lab user. Now this is important. What are they saying? You should communicate your CV percentages to the clinician also. For example, percentages of, let us say, sugar in your lab is 3%. Now you have told the value of my patient is 120, our lab CV percentage is 3%. So that means clinician now understands that for 100, 3 plus or 3 minus is acceptable. But if it is 10 plus, 10 minus, that means there is variation. So communicating to the physician, that's the purpose, that what range should he think that there is no difference. If the previous, once it was done, it was 117, now it is done, it is 120. So clinician can't say there is a difference. He says it's okay, acceptable. But your clinician should also understand what is CV percentage. So far in our kinds of setups, we ourselves as the lab people also don't understand it that much. So what to talk of physician. So to physician we normally say okay, 5-10 ka difference, it's okay. In creatinine, okay, 0.23 here and there, don't bother. You know, actually it should be exact CV percentage of the lab where he should not bother. When examinations include a measurement step but do not report a measured quantity value, the lab should calculate uncertainty of measurement step where it has utility in assessing the reliability of the examination procedure or has influence on the reported result. So this is in qualitative values. Also you have to consider some factors of uncertainty which can affect the result. 5.5.2 is what? Biological reference interval or clinical decision value. Lab shall define biological reference interval or clinical decision values, document the basis for reference interval or decision values, and communicate this information to the user. So are you people establishing your own biological reference intervals? No. Standard books. So basically all of us are using them from the standard textbooks. Standard says, if you see the next point, when a particular reference interval or decision value is no longer relevant for the population served, appropriate change shall be made and communicated to the user. Whereas we are not doing this practice. Reason, we are not sure about whether we are dealing with the normal patients or with the abnormal patients. Patient load is quite a bit, but there is no clear differentiation. So you can't create your own ranges. So far, interestingly, Indian data as such is not available. We are following Western biological ranges. We don't have Indian biological range. What to talk of geographical distribution of ranges. So we can't say that in Kolkata it is like this, or Punjab it is like this, or Mumbai the range is different. In actuality, to be very accurate, they must be different, because from population to population, geography to geography, some variation is there. And we've had this experience many times. I observed that we were doing OTPT, SGOT, SGPT. So we found that in certain races, especially we found in Punjabis, OTPTs generally come on the higher side, they'll be above normal. So in earlier days, the gastroenterologist would get that value and then write hepatitis profile, do this test, this test, this test. Ultimately, nothing would come. So after doing so many patients, we realized that we are unnecessarily doing this, but nothing is coming out. So we assumed that the normal range in this population is higher. But yes, we don't have anything to prove it, or we have not published any paper on it, or we have not done any further research work, or not informed anybody. So we are not sure about it. It is just the observation that this kind of a population has high OTPT rate. And same happens in many other things, if you know that in different geographies you will find certain things the biological ranges are different.
So I can give you example. Vitamin D now is very common.
Yeah.
We have done a lot of studies and we are scouting in different platforms. The Indians' reference range is always less as compared to Western.
Right.
If you compare Western, you will find there are all suffer deficiencies and.
This is happening. So here it looks like an epidemic that everybody has a low vitamin D. But interestingly, yes, I don't know how these things will over a period of time get established. But even in Western countries, it has become like a fashion that every other person is on vitamin D and vitamin B complex. If you go and see their drugstores, their counters are full of supplements. They are eating so much of supplements, and there also their vitamin D levels are coming so low. For that, I feel the biggest reason is that overall in the world, the exposure to sun has decreased. We hardly expose ourselves to sun. A generation before this, they used to go in all kinds of weathers, there were no cars, there were no vehicles to cover the person completely, air conditioning was not there. So the generation was exposed to sun so much. But this generation, there is no exposure to sun. You are living in air conditioned house, you are moving in air conditioned cars, you are hardly exposed to sun at all. So that is also one big reason that overall the vitamin D levels are decreasing. When the lab changes an examination procedure or pre-examination procedure, the lab shall review associated reference interval and clinical decision values as applicable. So you've seen that from method to method also there is some change in the range. So that also you have to see the factor. If you see thyroid profile with ELISA, thyroid profile with CLIA, range has some difference. Documentation and examination procedure. Examination procedure shall be documented. Shall be written in a language commonly understood by the staff and be available in the appropriate locations. Any condensed document format shall correspond to the documented procedure. Now what is this documented procedure which we are talking about? The technical SOPs. The level 3 documents. We consider those level. Top level is quality manual, then quality system procedures, then technical SOPs. So this clause 5.5.3 is talking about technical SOPs. Technical SOPs, for every test you have to write a procedure. Procedure in English, procedure in local language, because your technicians have to read it. So if they don't understand English, you have to give them in their language. All the SOPs are what? Controlled documents. If you have small instructions out of your SOPs, some displays, then they will also be matching to the SOPs and controls. Nobody can change them. So what are the headings under which an SOP has to be written? What are the headings? Purpose of examination, principle and method of procedure used, performance characteristics, type of sample, patient preparation, type of container and additive, required equipment and reagents. So if you see, all these things are given in your, where are they given? In your kit inserts. Kit inserts have all these things, but if you are creating your own SOPs, they become more uniform under the same heading, so your people find it easy to go through and implement. because otherwise every kit insert has a different format. Information you can take from insert, you can take from textbook, you can mix and match, but standard has given you the headings under which you should be writing an SOP. Environmental and safety control, calibration procedures, procedural steps, quality control procedures, interferences. If there is any hemolysis or any bilirubinemia, how it would affect the procedure. Principle of the procedure for calculating results, measurement uncertainty, biological reference interval, reportable interval of examination result. What is the meaning of reportable interval? What is reportable interval? No. It's reportable range, or you can say linearity. How much your reagent and your machine can give as maximum value and the minimum value. So the linearity of your test. Instructions for determining quantitative results when a result is not within the measured interval. Critical values where appropriate. Clinical interpretation. Potential sources of variation. References. If the lab intends to change an existing examination procedure such that results or their interpretation could be significantly different, implication shall be explained to the user. Now if the user says do thyroid with ELISA, now you have done clear, so you are supposed to inform that ELISA's range is this, we have done clear is a better method, this is the range, because he might be comparing, he's put the patient on some medication, so he's comparing with the previous result might be from ELISA, you have given from clear. There might be difficulty for him to understand and correlate. So you have to tell which method you have used and what is the range now. This requirement can be accomplished in different ways depending upon the local circumstances. Some methods include direct mailing, newsletter, or part of the examination procedure itself. So you can inform them beforehand, or you can put it on the report itself, what is the method and what is the reference range. So this was about 5.5.